event for us. Before we start the program, we have to have some paid advertisements, of course. We're with the Middlesex Heritage Group. This is our building. It was built in 1874, which is till 1937. It's on the National State Register of Historic Places. Our plaque says outside here. And we have events here. We have this event, and we have Seneca Heritage Day on the 2nd of September between 2 and 4. And once again, free ice cream. We'll also have slices of homemade pie for sale. We have Peter Jemison and Lonnie Ryder from Genongdigan.
Very good.
Very good. 7 years, I pronounced it right. And we're going to talk about the women's role in the Iroquois Nation and the women's in the Iroquois Nation, their influence on the early feminists in the United States. So that's 2 to 4 on the 2nd of September. We have Bill Krause here also, a Seneca singer, and we'll have his dancers, and a chance for everybody who will dance, a little Native American dancing. That event, and then on the 6th of August, we have Citizen Appreciation Day down at the Fire Hall. That 6th of August, right?
That's right.
2 o'clock.
What? And then, 2nd of August?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock on the 6th
2
of August.
o'clock, and I'd like to mention that the people being honored this year, Reverend James Utley, who was the Baptist minister for many, many years here in Middlesex, and Darrell Bassett, who was one of the first actual volunteer fire women in the state of New York. She's one of the first 6 in the state of New York. And the third person is Carol Davis, who was a great volunteer for both the ambulance and the Middlesex Hose Company. So that's again on August the 6th at 2 o'clock at the fire. Thank you.
So today's event is Teachers and Suffrage. It's being sponsored by the Yates County Historical Group and the Middlesex Heritage Group. We have Lisa Harper here, and we have Elaine Hilton. We set this up for presentation. We're going to have Miss Alice Bordwell. She was a one-room school teacher. It's going to be portrayed by Patty Larzelere.
Close.
I'm in Western Pennsylvania. I have a hard time with words. And when I get on stage, I can't get lost. Somebody has to pull me off for sure. But I was taking a poetry class down at the community college. I was down in Rushville. I told somebody that I have to go to my poetry class. And he says, "Are you going down to Dudley's?" I thought I said poetry. Western Pennsylvania. Anyway, who's going to go?
Lisa.
Lisa? Okay.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite everyone who hasn't been to the Yates County History Center before to please come and see us. We're open Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 4. We're very proud to present 2 centennial exhibits, centennial of the American entry into World War I, and also the 100th anniversary of New York State women's right to vote. So we hope that you can come and see us. Saturdays, the Opera House is also open from 10 until 2. So we do have a little bit of Saturday hours for you folks. I brought along all kinds of handouts and things. This shows you a little, just teases you on the exhibits that I just mentioned. So all those things are in the back. I won't tell you everything that's going on in the History Center in the next couple of months because there's a lot. And I have information about a lot of things. There's walking tours on Main Street. But the next big event, which I think will be enjoyable for everyone, Cobblestone Houses of Yates County. And that will be on August the 5th. It's a Saturday right at the L. Carolyn Underwood Museum, which is in Henrietta. Richard Palmer from Syracuse has done a tremendous amount of study. We'll learn more not only about the structures and the different styles of cobblestone architecture, but also about the people who built and lived in those houses. So we're looking forward to that. So you can find out more information about events here or on our website. Now I gave you a handout because I wasn't really sure what kind of get to know a little bit better soon. When we're talking about suffrage, there are a variety of, I guess you could call levels of suffrage. Some of you may not know that there was the first step for many states for women was school suffrage. In other words, the ability for a woman to be able to vote for school board people and also for budgetary or curriculum reasons. So there was school suffrage. There was also property owning women in New York and locally in Penn were able to vote in issues that affected them, tax issues that affected them. So that was another step towards suffrage, and then you had the full suffrage. So I looked at a national and state level, the suffrage issues, and more locally, we'll get into that a little bit too, anyway, too. So let me set the stage for you, teachers and suffrage. First, I want to remind you that in some states, they did get the school suffrage first. Here in New York State, it was 1880. If we start our conversation about suffrage in 1848, when women met in Seneca Falls, and the Seneca Falls Convention, you can see in your top right there a little bit of a quote from that convention. 1848, Susan Anthony was a teacher. She'd been teaching for 2 years over in Conagahary, Distillery. And so what were the reasons that women wanted to get the school suffrage vote first? At this time, there were only about 7 occupations that were approved of for women. And 4 of those involved needlework, so they were a lace maker or a tailor or a hat maker or those things. And teaching was one thing that women were allowed to do. However, it was the fathers who would decide whether their daughter was allowed to work or if she was made to stay home. So you were at the mercy of dad. All the trustees in the schools were men, and the male trustees approved the curriculum and the wages for the teachers, and they controlled how much chalk you got and how much coal was in your stove. In the more urban areas, you'll find that where there were school boards initially, the students and the citizens really needed some kind of protection from the manipulative board members and crazy politicians who were using their power at the school board level to influence and make profits for themselves. So the female teachers earned from 1/2 to 1/3 of what the men did. No chance for upward mobility. Women were the teachers, men were the administrators. And if you really rocked the boat and questioned that, you could be fired at any time, and there was always another teacher waiting outside to take your position. So school improvement societies began, and also school suffrage associations, and they were throughout the United States. They were trying to make the point that child-centered voters, women, felt a moral obligation to ensure their proper education for their children and also to protect their children. And I think you'll see a little in this cartoon that's on your handout. It talks a little bit about why women wanted school suffrage vote. They were interested in both home and school. So that gives you a little example of that. The way to gain more power in these areas was through the vote. School suffrage was first permitted in Kentucky, of all places, in 1838, but only for widows who had children. Isn't that wonderful? So women were fighting simultaneously for school suffrage and for full suffrage in most places, including New York. In the 25 years after the Civil War, school suffrage was probably the biggest practical achievement of the women's suffrage movement up to that point. And remember, New York State, 1880 is when women earned the right to vote for school issues. But even when states granted women school suffrage, they played games. There were multiple roadblocks to women voting, even in school elections. In Massachusetts, women had to appear at a registrar, they had to prove they could read and write, they had to list all of their assets, and they had to pay a 50-cent poll tax. Does this sound familiar to you from the 20th century? These were the same games that people played with the blacks vote. So would you comply with something like that? Would you drag yourself into town, tell everybody your business? Probably not. And one more severe example, Lucy Stone, she was the founder of the Massachusetts School Suffrage Association, and she never used her married name, Mrs. Blackwell. She liked her maiden name. And for that reason, she insisted she would not use her married name when she registered, and the registrar would not let her vote, would not let her register, because she wouldn't use her married name. Lists of women who had registered mysteriously disappeared. Any game that they could play, it was there. So when the anti-suffragists in Massachusetts, in this case, saw, well, the women weren't coming in, well, they really don't want to vote. So they used it as ammunition against us when they saw that women were not going to play a game and jump all over these rules. In Ohio in 1892, the first suffrage legislation, school suffrage, was 1892, allowed women not only to vote in school issues, but allowed them to run for school board. However, you could not vote on financial issues. And those were those little hiccup roadblocks that kept getting in the way. But school suffrage really elevated women's attention to the idea that the need and the potential for getting women onto school boards to gain some more power. This quote from this cute book I read: "Women would prove a cleansing force on school boards." They have high hopes for us. So the cartoon you've seen, the first woman in Payy School District to get to the school board was Louise Shepherd, and she was a suffragist. She had hosted a meeting of over 100 women on Main Street in Payy before 1917. So she was the first woman to serve on the school board. Shall we raise up for our guest? So school suffrage was one example of this connection that we had between women's political advancement and the public school system. Suffragists used the example of school suffrage to convince the public of how ridiculous it was to not go the extra mile. And in New York State, as I mentioned, to make it more ridiculous, they did, in 1901, in New York State, allow women who own property to vote on issues of taxes. While this isn't about teachers, we do know about a suffragist from Payy named Julia Shepherd, very active. And Susan Anthony wrote her a letter to talk about that issue of property tax voting if you have property. Your town has voted upon some tax question of late I saw, and the tax-paying women went out and voted. Would it be any more for them to go and vote for mayor, for governor, for president? Now I hope the women of Payy, because apparently there were still lots of women who didn't think this voting was such a great idea. Susan said, I hope the women of Payy will look at this whole question in the light of facts and not prejudice. So we do know that Anthony was here, she was engaged, and knew many of the Yates County residents. So the school suffrage and property suffrage was obviously not enough for women. As a teacher, how could you teach civics if you couldn't vote? How could you teach what you don't know? So that was one point that teachers made. So nationally, the teachers were organized at the state and national level, and they used those organizations that were already in place. They had membership lists, they had state meetings, they had newsletters to actively campaign for full suffrage. Not only did they do that, but the WCTU was already also at a national level, and so they too used their already in place infrastructure to help campaign for full suffrage. Teachers wanted bargaining power, job security, higher quality schools. The WCTU wanted vote to encourage pro-abortion and get that to go through. So I want to tell you about this lady from Payy, from Yates County, and you'll see a nice image of her at the top here. I have a full story about her. There's some handouts in the back if anybody really wants to hear a lot more about her. She's just the coolest gal. She really demonstrates how much a woman could accomplish in the education field after only 9 years of full suffrage in California. She moved to California. California women earned the full suffrage in 1911, 6 full years before New York State. So this lady, her name's Susan Miller Dorsey. She was the daughter of Jim and Hannah Miller on the Sherman Hollow Road area, town of Jerusalem. She was born in 1857. She was an excellent student, wanted to be a teacher right away. She graduated from Payy Academy in 1873. She was only 16. And she headed off to Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. She graduated. She taught at Wilson College, at Vassar, and eventually, through life's ups and downs, she ended up teaching Latin at the only high school in Los Angeles, California. And this was in 1896. She was divorced and had a son. So she quickly ascended from teaching to assistant principal role. Now remember, we've got full suffrage, so the opportunities are better. By 1913, only 2 years after full suffrage, she was appointed an assistant superintendent of LA schools. By 1920, she was the full superintendent of LA schools, the first woman superintendent of any major metropolitan area in the country. She did her job exceedingly well through very challenging times. When she took the reins in 1920, the LA district was the fastest growing school district in the world. In the first 7 years of her work, the attendance doubled in her district to 200,000 children. And she had 100 buildings under construction. She was in charge of all that. At the time of her retirement, 9 years later, in 1929, she oversaw a district with 400 buildings and a budget of $30 million. Wow. How's that for a penny and But she was also very progressive. She was an extraordinary superintendent. She developed kindergarten classes. She developed an Americanization program for immigrants. Remember, this is Los Angeles. She encouraged adaptations for the handicapped and also for those who had reading difficulties. She started vocational training in her schools, and she developed the California State History classes that the children took. Quite a gal. She retired at 72, was highly respected by everyone. There's a high school named for her in LA, and she received honorary degrees from 6 universities. So there's the power of the vote, ladies and gentlemen. And Payy Academy School. Her story is really great. There's, like I said, there's a handout out there if you'd like to read a little bit more about her. Highly accomplished. It appears that the earliest district superintendents were all in the western states. You could read more about that to figure out why most of the western states received full suffrage first, several of them. I want to call attention to this artifact from the History Center. I'm very proud of it. It is one of 5 petition boards that were they're part of our collection. And you can come up later and see if you see anybody you know. Each petition was carried throughout Hill and Dale in Yates County to collect signatures demanding the right to vote in New York State. Right before the second vote, we voted in 15, it got shot down in the 1917. Right before the 1917 vote, all of these petitions were glued on these boards, and the handles were created here. And these petition boards went to New York City, and you can see the image in the bottom right. They were marched in a parade where over 1 million New York State women's signatures were represented, demanding the right to vote. And we have 5 of these boards in our collection. We're very proud of that. And I would like for you to know that we do have the transcribed and indexed, so if you want to look for grandma, great-grandma, we hope you'll come see our suffrage exhibit. One of the key parts of this, if you're asking the million-dollar question of were local teachers brave enough to come out and support suffrage, women who signed these petitions were promised anonymity for 100 years. This is the atmosphere that was here in Yates County. It's a very conservative county now, even, and back then was even more conservative. So I think that may answer that question somewhat. Some of the women who collected these petitions, Florence Upson from Dundee, she was self-employed, so she didn't have to worry about anybody firing her. And Libby Griffin and Ella Ball from Cooper College. And Ella's dad was a trustee, Libby's husband was a trustee, so they really didn't have to worry too much about getting fired. So among these petition boards that we have transcribed and indexed, I want you to know that there were 3 Middlesex Rushville teachers who signed these petitions. Edith Bates, Mrs. Arthur Kuhns, and Ruth Hartnagel, and Ruth's signature is on this one. You'll be able to see that later, and that's a familiar name. And then the following women who signed these petition boards, or ones at the museum, taught right here in this very room. And they were Essie Elwell, Nellie Bennett, Leela Rosen, and Alice Bates. I don't think we found Alice Bordwell's name, did we? That doesn't mean she didn't support suffrage, but she may have been afraid for her job. So the teachers were at the mercy of the male trustees. The vote in 1917 in Yates County was defeated by 800 votes. And so my guess is the answer to the question is, were the women brave enough? I doubt it. But I don't know for sure. But Elaine has more information about some of our local gals who were teaching or involved in education. And so we'll let her tell you some more about some folks.
Really interested in learning about teachers in our town a few years ago when John Potter, executive director, is here today, Yates County, started leading a book that had been started in the 30s. Jesse there, whatever her name. But there were a lot of gaps in who taught, so I really, some might say, gotten obsessed with finding out who they all were, checking Fulton history, old newspapers, and all. And I figured out from the newspaper articles who taught in a lot of our schools. I was looking for probably reprints sometime of some of the signers' names were in the newspaper back in 1917, I think it was. I don't have that handout here. So probably they were afraid to sign, some of them, or maybe their bosses or their husbands or whoever did not encourage them. Oh, I want to tell you something before I forget. Yesterday, when my sister, Scarlett Emerson, and I were here straightening up, looking around, the door was open and 2 young girls rode up on their bicycles out front. And they were Mennonite girls, and we invited them to come in. And I said, is this still a school? They said, no. I gave them a brief history. I'm not sure we said, it was built in 1874, but when the school centralized in 1938, and they built the new Middlesex Valley School, closed all the one-room schoolhouses, and the Buttons down the road here purchased this and used it for grain storage. Well, then along came the Middlesex Heritage Group many years later in the 80s, around the time of the town bicentennial. It was decided that maybe they would, the Heritage Group was formed, and maybe they could lease it to the Heritage Group. And I think there are some people here today, I wasn't living around here then, so I didn't get to participate in cleaning up, but there are some people here definitely today, right, who wear and cleaned and painted and got it back in order. So it's a real treasure for our town to have. A few years ago, we had some of the former students here, and one thing they told us is, no, this isn't where the teacher's desk was, it was really back there, but, oh well. We do have, I think the bell is original, am I right? That bell was here. Yeah, there's a few things that are original. So these girls yesterday, I gave them a little brief history. Yes, this was a school, and then it wasn't, and now we, well, you know, and where do you go to school? I said, they go, guess what, you know, they go to a one-room schoolhouse over the other side of Russia. And they had biked, their brother has recently bought a home right up here, and they had ridden their bicycles from between Rushville and Gorham, and they come up Pierce Hill here. They did not ride their bikes all the way up the hill. I'm kind of glad to hear that. I wouldn't be doing that. They had walked their bikes. But I got to ask them about their school. So that was really, felt like I'm in a time warp here. They have about 30 students in their school, and they do have 2 teachers a lot of the time. We talked about, I think Dan asked about, do they study arithmetic? Do they use calculators? No, they don't have calculators. It was just, it was really fun learning about their school. So the Middlesex schools, there were 8 one-room schools in the district, the town. And number 1 was the Pine Corners School, down almost to Rushville. And teacher there was Josephine Kuhns in 1917. And she is on one of the boards, not this one, but her signer. Her name, Mrs. Arthur Kuhns, was signed. Of course, probably wouldn't have used her own first name. And I think we should say they're not all signatures, right? We think that someone transcribed, maybe. Some of the petitions are obviously all in the same handwriting. So probably these women signed something and then someone else transferred it. In Middlesex Center, downtown, the bigger school, the principal was F.W. Gray in 1917, and his wife signed. I think hers is on this one. The primary teacher was Ruth Hartnagel, who later married a local man, Charles Williams, who had her for a teacher. I didn't, but there are some people who had her as a second grade teacher in Middlesex Valley, because she taught there for several years. And I think you said the name Edith Bates. She taught here. And she was later married to Harry Hart, which some of us remember Harry and Edith in Middlesex. She taught in Cuca Park, which was a hotbed of activity kind of with the suffragists. So not surprising that she signed for it. Here at Overacres, it was Leela Robson in 1917, was the teacher, and she signed. The Vine Valley School was number 4 down on South Vine Valley Road. That's where Bessie Elwell, and many of us probably remember her as Bessie Mosier. And Mertz Road, which is this way, number 5, the teacher was Alice Goodrich. We haven't found that she signed. And number 6 was where Alice Bordwell taught, one of the places she taught. And she was later married to Laverne Elwell, who was Bessie's brother. And maybe this is when I should say we have some of her descendants here. Some of these folks here are descended from Alice Bordwell. Alice, glad to be here. And District 7 was on West Avenue. That's below Middlesex, below the Baptist Church Ethel Goodrich was teacher there, and as far as we know, she didn't assign. I think we have someone here, District Number 8 in 1917 was way up on the top of South Hill, Juanita Underwood. We have a, yes, we have a descendant of Juanita Underwood Armitage here. Yeah. And we actually have a copy of her, not a copy, her real actual contract for teaching on South Hill that year. I think it was $11 was her salary.
A few half cents.
Yeah, yeah. So those were the teachers in 1917 in the town of Middlesex. I think I should give some equal time. I know, and I have seen the exhibit in Yates County History Center, but I just heard the other day about the one in Ontario County Museum, which I have not seen yet, but it's going to be there for a while, but I understand that is a wonderful exhibit they got in Canada too. So, I think that's all I have to say about the local schools, but we are very happy to have with us today Alice Bordwell. Elwell came to visit us.
Hello. Very nice to see you. Where'd you come from? Oh my goodness, you had a long trip. Hello. It's so nice to see you today. Now, I do want to say that one of the things about Alice was that she was soft-spoken. So you will need to be very quiet or ask me to speak up. But another thing about Alice was that she really endeavored to get to know the people in her environment and to greet them and make them feel very warm and accepted. So that's what I go to. Hello, it's so nice to see you. Glad you're here. Welcome. No trouble for me. Just young ladies, what's your name? Alice what? Oh, well, we're related. Well, as I said, I was known to be soft-spoken and not very big, but I was born in 1893 in Potter. When I was 8 years old, our family moved to Middlesex, and I attended the Middlesex Union School. And while I was there, I loved learning. I loved the whole environment. I knew I wanted to be a teacher. So in 1912, when I graduated from Middlesex Union, I boarded in Naples because that was where the closest teacher training class was. And are any of you familiar with the term basket boarder? Okay, well, a basket boarder, I was a basket boarder at Naples. That meant that I was staying with a family. I paid $4 a week for my room, board, and laundry. And on the weekends, I'd drive home to my family in Middlesex. Now, there's a story about that. There were, I'm not sure how many people there were in my training class, but my very best friend there, her name was Bertha Warren. She was going to come home with me. It was about the second week of November. We were driving the horse and carriage home on a Saturday. Something spooked the horse. That horse took off, the carriage turned over. We were bruised, but we were okay. And I was okay enough that 2 weeks later, I gave a presentation to the Naples Literary Society entitled How Girls Study. How girls study? How hard could that be? Anyway, Bertha and I and 2 others were very bright. We finished our teacher training in December, had a January graduation in And the Naples Record reported about the 23rd of January that I, Bertha, and 2 other of our classmates were hired as teachers, and that I was going to be teaching beyond Payy. I don't know where beyond Payy ever ended up being, but here's the story about how I got there. So I get a call from a school trustee. You have to learn to live with these things when you're in the country. And father was there, right behind me. I guess he was really anxious that I get a job. So, anyway, his first question was, "What's your experience?" And I said, "Well, I had just graduated from a teacher training class in Naples, and I had, since that time, I had substituted for a few weeks at the Vine Valley School." And then he wanted to know how old I was. And father was right behind us. Better tell him straight. I said, "Well, I'm 20 years old." "Okay, we'll give you $10 a week, but you'll have to be your own janitor, make your own fires, bring in your own coal, and make sure to erase your blackboards." And I thought, don't all teachers erase their blackboards? But then I said, well, if I have to do all those things, I think I should earn more than $10 a week. He said, well, yeah, I guess so. So will you take it if it's $12 a week? So I did. And let's see, my little notes here. So the good thing about wherever beyond Payy was that some neighbors that had lived around us in Middlesex had moved there. Their name was Pitcher. And father said we should call the Pitchers and see if you could board with them. So we did. And Mrs. Pitcher said, well, sure, you can board with us if you can stand the commotion. That meant they had 5 children, 3 of whom would be my students at the school. So father hooked up the horse to the Democrat wagon, and we drove to beyond Payy. Mrs. Pitcher had fixed over their parlor for me. It was quite lovely. There was a bed and a stove. It was very pretty. Father got back in the Democrat wagon, came back home. I had younger brothers, and I think they were quite young, so, and everyone was a farmer, so you had to get back home to take care of your animals. But after he left, Mrs. Pitcher gave me the scheme on what I was getting into. She told me that there had been 2 teachers previous to me. One from the district where the school was located. And somehow the children had locked the teacher out of the schoolhouse. No matter how much she banged on that door, the students wouldn't let her in. So she took herself home and had a nervous breakdown. Well, then the superintendent hired a woman from Payy to come and be the teacher. She lasted a little bit longer, but the same fate came to her. They locked her out of the school and they wouldn't let her in, so she took herself home to Payy. So these students had not had a teacher for a little bit. And I went to bed that night thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I didn't sleep very well. But the next morning, Mrs. Pitcher told me that she would hold her children back to give me a head start to get to school and, get the fire started and kind of get myself composed, which was great. But imagine my surprise when I got there, the 2 ringleaders, the boys that were ringleaders of this, monkey business with the previous teachers, they were already there. They had the fire going. They had 2 scuttles of coal ready to go. And I was like, oh, how nice. So I took the time to talk to them and get to know them before the other students came. And then as the other students started to come in, they said, oh, we'll let you know who they are. And I said, oh, that won't be necessary. Just take your seats. I've got my register. I'll be able to tell you. So once I had all the children checked off on my register, then I said, what do you do for chapel in the morning? You should have seen the blank stares. I said, well, do you read from the Bible or pray the Our Father? No. Do you salute the flag or say the Pledge of Allegiance? No. I said, well, we're going to have to turn over a new shift here. So I sent the picture children back home and asked them to have their mother get my picture Bible out of the parlor room. And they brought it back. I said, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to start every morning with a Bible reading and the Lord's Prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. So that's what we did. And initially, the only voice in the room praying the Our Father and saying the Pledge of Allegiance was mine. Eventually, they caught on. As I said, I accepted them where they were, and I think that was the secret of my success to some degree. At recess time, it was winter. We all went outside together, and I said, so, shall we play fox and geese? Again, a blank stare. So I taught them how to play fox and geese. Well, then a man in a car comes along and he stops. So I walk over and he says to me, can you tell me where the new teacher is boarding? And I said, well, I'm Miss Bordwell, I'm the new teacher. And he said, really? I could have sunk into that snowman. I wasn't much bigger than all the rest of the students in my school. Well, he was concerned. He wanted to know if I had any trouble yet. I said, oh no trouble yet. And I said, I don't think I'll have any. He said, well, the minute you have some trouble, you get in touch with me right away. I said, okay, but I don't think I will, really. And I never did. The boys that were the troublemakers, by the time they reached age 16, they just left. But they weren't any trouble to me. And the superintendent came a couple of times before Easter vacation that year. And the second time that he came, he said to me, are you going home for Easter vacation? And I said, oh no, I can't possibly go home. It's too far for my father to come and get me and then take me back. He said, well, that being the case, you can teach right through, and then as soon as your students have completed all of their work, let me know. I'll send the exams and you can let them out for summer recess early. So that's what we did. So our last day of school that year was May 22nd, and we had planned a great event. We were going to have an outdoor picnic in the woods and a program so that the children could show their parents all the things that they had learned. Well, it had snowed that night. And it was still snowing that morning. All the children came to school. They all said, teacher, we've got to have our picnic. And one of the mothers said, why don't we just set up some sawhorses and some planks in the woodshed, and that's where we'll set out the food. So that's what we did. We still had our picnic, although not in the woods, it was in the woodshed. But it was very successful. Father came for me that very afternoon. He had a big umbrella. It snowed all the way from there back to home. We were drenched. So I had a successful year that year. They wanted me back there the next year, but Father said no, it was too far away. Mother's helpless family, and he wanted me closer. So my next year of teaching was at the Stone School, right up there on the wall, here in Middlesex. The children there were much better behaved and much more eager learners. Most of their parents were very active rangers, and so active, in fact, that not only was I the teacher, but I got called upon many times to babysit so that families could go to Grange meetings. That was different. The challenge of teaching in that round stone schoolhouse was that there were no corners to put the naughty children in. But there were very wide windowsills, and I used those to my advantage. Any of the children who got their work done could sit in the windowsills and read or color as long as they didn't disturb anyone else. So I never really had any trouble with act-ups because they all wanted to sit in the windowsills and do their own reading or writing. So that was my year at that school. Then, in my third year of teaching, Father said, you have got to be the teacher in your own home school district. The trustees were not in favor of that at all. They said, how can she possibly teach because she'll have her brothers right there? And Father was a very vocal man. He said, those boys will not be any problem. So, initially they weren't, but my brother Bradley decided he was going to test the waters one day. He sassed me. So I said to him, Bradley, you come right up here. And I got my ruler out, one of those big old ones with the wire edge, and I made it look like I was going to, tar the smithereens out of him. And I said, hold out your hands, and I gave him a good whack with the ruler. He never blinked, he never flinched, he just returned to his seat, and I never had any problems after that with any of them. But it made me feel awful, just awful. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the business of teaching. Not only did I have to be my own janitor in all of my schools, but I also had all 8 grades, from first grade through 8th grade. There were between 15 and 18 students in each grade level. So that didn't leave a lot of time for anybody who was having some trouble. If the students completed all of the items on the syllabus for whatever grade level they were in, once they tested, they could go on to the next grade level. So it was not uncommon for students to start in first grade and progress very quickly all the way through the 8th grade. In fact, I had a couple of little girls, they were girls, and that's what happened with them. They just progressed so well, and they came not knowing a thing. So it was a wonderful year. I had one teaching failure. There was a boy, I just didn't have enough time to spend with him. I was able to teach him how to write his name, but he just couldn't figure out the value of money. He thought a nickel was just as much as a dime, and he wasn't any trouble to me. He would pretend that he was reading, but I knew he was pretending because his book would be upside down. So I was concerned for that boy, but by the time he got to be 16, he too left and got a job as a farmhand. Well, the farm wife had a little more time to spend with him than I did. And it was reported that she had helped him understand the value of money and actually open a bank account. And I was afraid that would be causing me to not have my job the next year. But when the superintendent came, all of the rest of the children had progressed so nicely except this one. And he said, that's all right, we'll let that go. Well, many years later, he was lived always in the same school district. There was a party for Dr. Chisholm. Everyone signed a card wishing him well. And I asked Dr. Chisholm, may I see that card, please? He allowed it, and there was that boy's name. He still remembered how to write his name. So that was my success with my one failure. I did teach one summer on the South Hills School District. Their winters were terrible there, and sometimes they would just have to close the school for a couple of months and then make them up in the summer. So that was my 1 year of teaching summer school. And I did meet Laverne Elwell. We married in 1921. But in my last year of teaching, hot lunches became something that everybody could partake of. So instead of children bringing their lunches in lard pails, not the lunch pails that I know you see today, not even the lunch pails that are back there in the display cases, they were simply lard pails. And children often brought bread and butter sandwiches, dill pickles, hard-boiled eggs, and in the wintertime they'd freeze. So we'd find sticks. The stove was usually in the middle of the school building because that way everybody would have a chance to stay warm. And they'd roast their bread and butter sandwiches to get them to melt. Hopefully they didn't fall onto the stove. But so that last year, the school district provided hot lunches. I would always start the day by making sure all of the children had some hot cocoa. And then a typical lunch would be soup of some kind, dried beef with codfish gravy, and boiled potatoes. Well, at that point, recess became peeling potatoes and boiling potatoes for our lunches. Now, as I said, I married Elwell in 1921. I loved children, and we had some trouble getting our family started, but then it took off. So we had Rudolph, Agnes, Betty, and Robert. Rudolph, when he was 16 years old, contracted polio, and he had to be moved to a hospital near Ithaca because he had to be in an iron lung. I never ever got a driver's license, so I was always asking friends, neighbors, relatives, please drive me to Ithaca so I may see Rudolph. And eventually he recovered. He became a watch repairman and a tool maker. Agnes and Robert moved to Payy, and eventually I did too. We had a farm somewhere here in Middlesex. We grew grapes and had sheep and cows. So many of the students that I had taught would come and work for us, either seasonally in the vineyard or help out with the sheep and cows. So I always got to see many of my students. But when we got older, we sold the farm, moved to Payy, so I could be closer to our children and the grandchildren. And I kept a pair of binoculars near the window so I could see out to where the school bus was picking up the children. If one of my grandchildren wasn't getting on the bus, I was calling to find out what was wrong. I enjoyed the many visitors that would come to visit me at my home in Payy, whether it was my own children, my grandchildren, who would, if they were coming home from college, they'd stop and visit me before they'd go and see mom and dad. I kept busy by crocheting and tatting, and I loved to play flinch. I guess I just was a big kid. I loved to play things, and so when people came to visit, we'd have nice conversation, but we would play flinch or some kind of card game. I was very proud of my students who decided to go into teaching because of my influence. Caroline Underwood being one of them. Also, my daughter-in-law, Pat, Robert's wife. And they asked me, what's your success? And I said, well, I think you have to love your students as if they're your own. And you have to believe in the very best for each of them. So thank you for listening to my story. I'll entertain questions, but I may not have answers.
What year did you retire?
Well, women were not encouraged to teach after they got married. So I got married in 1921 and ended my teaching career. You couldn't be an accredited dean. That just wasn't allowed. Any other questions?
Did you vote?
Did I vote? Well, I asked about that as I was doing my research for this. Was She may have supported the idea of it, but she was not a vocal proponent of it. She definitely felt that men and women were equal in many ways, and she was very respectful of everyone, which probably was also the success of her relationship with so many people, especially the cut-ups. But her family could not tell me definitively that yes, she was a suffragette, and I do not believe her name is on any petition boards.
I have a guess about that. She did have the two younger brothers, and they were quite a bit younger than she, and her mother did pass away while she was teaching over on East Hill. I think the brothers were still around. So my guess is her father still needed her, and the brothers, and she also was a little bit older. Was she 25 or so when she married, which is a little bit old for that era.
That's true. You would have been considered a spinster.
My grandmother has a signature on one of these, and I just wish I could bring her back. What did you think about that? She was very active in the WCTU, and I think, as Lisa said, I guess that went hand in hand. But maybe it's very warm. Where's the next portion of our program?
The ice cream man's over there.
The ice cream man. Our town historian he is, but he's great with the ice cream. So, yes?
Perhaps people would be interested in talking with Alice and Esther about what they remember about their grandmother.
Thank you, Share. We do have Alice, Elwell, Allison, and Esther Elwell. Hey, John. They're Alice and Esther today, because I remember them. But they were able to join us today. We're very happy. So they, anyone wants to ask them about grandma? Yes?
Can we ask how many here went to one schoolhouse or two schoolhouse?
How many here may have attended a one-room schoolhouse or a two-room? Or what you attended a one-room schoolhouse? And this one here, I think.
That's two.
Three.
Three.
1, 2, 3. So they could tell us some stories too.
One from Idaho.
No, Iowa.
Oh, Idaho.
My mother, I know, attended a one-room schoolhouse out in Iowa.
How many years were you in the one school?
Is there any story from being in one schoolhouse that you can share with us?
Do you have a story to share at all about one-room school, special events? You had to walk to school, yeah. And it was real bad. And I think you went to school up on Walden's Corners through 7th grade, and they decided they didn't have enough students, right, for 8th grade, so then she rode her bicycle into Rushville, like these Mennonite girls rode your bicycle. Yeah, so I looked right on it. And about the you have
I started in the Hutchins district, and then I ended up in this district where it was at the Middlesex Square Village. But the stories that my mother told about that one were very fascinating, only because in the first school I went to, that these seats were tiered. And the one thing I always remember, that after I became a teacher, I knew how it happened. But my teacher would all of a sudden say, "John, sit down." And John was about 6 foot tall. He was in the last row up each tier. And she'd be writing at the blackboard, and all of a sudden she'd say, "John, sit down." And I didn't know how she knew that until I became a teacher, and I also developed eyes in the back of my head, which she probably had too.
She probably did.
soap pipe, go like this around.
Why did this other place on fire?
It's a challenge.
So that's here too. Many of our mothers would take big pots of soup and put it on the stove, and it would simmer all day long until noon. And so we would have hot soup for lunch.
Did you have another?
We are on this. Water.
Nice.
But the water never came right from the school section. It came from the house and the garage. And then if you got a half a pail back of water for the day, you were doing well. So they got water. Two kids who talked fishing on the pail.
It's hard to believe now that the former students here told those stories about walking to the neighbors. This was quite a thriving community right here. There was a church, at least one church here, down the road, and a blacksmith shop, and I guess a store. A lot of houses right around here. And the schools built in 1874, but there were schools before that, starting with a law school, and it was quite a thriving community. And then the train, I think we figured, came through Middlesex Valley. So then Middlesex, which of course there's not very much happening there now, but that was a really thriving community, and Old Raptors kind of went away. Whatever. So the ice cream is ready.
Oh, I was the
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So I got most of the information about my presentation of Alice from a transcript of her addressing the Middlesex Heritage Group in 1893. I'm sorry, 1983. Yeah. But she was here with Hazel Robeson at that time. And Hazel ended their program with a poem. And it's called The Tin Dipper. It hung on a pail that stood on a stool by the door of an old-time country school. And the water it dipped was cool and sweet, and fresh as mountain dew in the school's heat. The handle was long and its cup was battered, but to sharing children, all that mattered was the clear, cool drink that would quench the thirst of the lucky younger that reached it first. And never was water so good, so cool, as dipped from the pail of that country school. Along with the schoolhouse of another day, the common dipper has passed away. But on warm days it's good to think of that old dipper's refreshing drink from the shining pail on a wooden stool by the door of an old-time country school. And she added, and I might say we all drank out of the same dipper. The pail was put in the hall one dipper. We didn't get sick. Nobody ever got sick from their little dipper.
Or so they say. So they say, yes. There was a wall, I guess, back here, right? There was the entryway, and, well, as I said, the teacher's desk was there, and the students. But we're just happy that the building is still here.